yellow color. Now I put a little bit. Yeah, not too much, my friend. Because too much will be very dark, very bad flower. Little bit it look like shining and it look very good. And 10 color in the center. Maybe you use orange, you use the red. And how you feel? After I add first, how you feel? Does it look good? Okay. This flower, I love the white, but you love the red. I mix the red color. That's it. Easy, huh? I can do. You can do. Believe me. And you come to school, I'm Tony. I'm Pastor. I will teach you.
Welcome to Pancake Princess. I'm Andrea, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make a vanilla sugar cookie recipe. These are the ones that I baked into my cookie lollipops. You can decorate them into my Rainbow Loom Bands cookie lollipop or my frozen cookie wands. Check the links at the end of this video for the cookie ones, and you can see more frozen party ideas as well. Here are the vanilla cookie recipe ingredients. I'm going to start by adding my 2 types of sugar, my eggs, my vanilla extract, and mixing it through. Next, I'm adding in my flour, my butter, now I'm just going to use my hands just to mix it through. Once it's come together, I'm going to put some flour onto my table, and then I'm just going to take it out and knead it together. Don't forget to click the like button below and click add to favorites if you want to save this recipe for later. Okay, now I'm just going to wrap it up into cling wrap. I'm going to double wrap it, and then I'm going to place it into the fridge to set for at least a few hours. Once it's set, I'm going to take it out, pull a section off, and I'm just going to work it in my hand slightly so it's a little bit more workable before I roll it out. Placing some flour onto some baking paper, and then using my rolling pin and my 2 wooden skewers to help me roll out my cookie dough. The skewers just helps me roll it out to an even thickness. Now I'm using my circle cutter to cut out my cookies. What is your favourite type of cookie? Comment and share with me below. I'm going to use my smaller wooden skewers and slowly twist them into the cookie. Using a tiny little bit of cookie dough, I've flipped the cookie over, and I've just placed it at the back to give it a bit more support. Placing it onto the tray, and I'm going to bake it in a preheated oven for about 15 minutes. Checking at 10 minutes, because ovens do vary on how hot they get. Once they're baked, you take them out and let them cool down. And that's your cookie lollipops, ready to be decorated any way you want. You can check out the Loom Bands one or the frozen cookie ones at the end of this video.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Creative Cakes by Sharon. With Halloween just around the corner, today I'm creating a Nightmare Before Christmas cake for you, featuring both Jack Skellington. For this particular cake today, I used my Bundt tin and I cooked 2 cakes which I've cooled and trimmed the tops off so they're nice and flat. I've got a square cake board, I've got my offset spatula, X-Acto blade and black edible marker. I've got my fondant rolling pin as well as some buttercream frosting, a mixture of Smarties in red, white and black colours. I've got a little bit of water and a paintbrush as well as my pastry brush. I've got some white chocolate ganache. I've got some white, red, black and light blue fondant. The first thing I'm going to do is fill my cake with some buttercream frosting. Now because a Bundt cake is very tall, I've divided the top and the bottom into 2 so that I have 4 layers of cake in total. That way, with each serving of cake, you're going to get a nice addition of the buttercream frosting instead of just a large piece of cake. Now I'm going to use my white chocolate ganache to create a crumb coat on the cake. I'm not going to be too fussy about the neatness of this coating because I'm going to add a second layer. So once I've finished this, I'm going to put it in the fridge for about 15 minutes and come back to do the next layer. So now I've got my cake back out of the fridge and I'm going to add a second coating of the white chocolate ganache. This time it's going to be a little bit thicker and I'm going to try and smooth it as much as I can as I go. I don't need to be too fussy about covering up all of the grooves in the Bundt cake because the grooves are going to actually be a feature in the final cake. Once again, when I've finished the coating, the cake's going to go back in the fridge for another 15 minutes. Now I'm going to smooth the surface of my cake down and I'm going to dip my offset spatula into my boiling water here, wipe off the excess moisture and smooth over the ganache. At this point I'm going to transfer my cake onto my cake board. I did say this cake was an inside surprise cake, and to create the surprise we're going to pour in all of the M&Ms and the Smartie mix to the centre of the cake. These are all going to spill out when we cut into the cake. Now I've started to cover my cake and you can see here that I've already covered the white side, which is actually Jack Skellington's side. So I'm going to show you how to cover the Bundt cake for Sally's side. I'm using my pastry brush and the water to moisten the ganache. This is going to help the fondant to stick nicely onto the cake. Then I've just cut a nice neat edge at the bottom of my fondant. And carefully rolling it onto my rolling pin, I'm going to drape it over the cake. Now it's just a matter of opening up the fondant and smoothing it around the surface of the cake. I'm going to use my fingers to push the fondant as far as I can at the bottom of the cake. I've just turned my cake around so you can see that I'm just trimming off the excess red fondant at the join and removing the excess on both sides. Then I'm using a little ball of red fondant to slowly massage the fondant into the seam and making it a nice smooth finish. And finally I'm just going to trim off the excess fondant at the very bottom of the cake. I do want this cake to look like it's a pumpkin that's been painted with Jack and Sally on either side. So using my finger I'm just going to press into the grooves of the Bundt cake to create a pumpkin-like appearance. I'm going to work on creating Sally's face first, and it's going to be in the shape of a heart. So I'm using this blue fondant to cut the basic shape of her face out. I'm also going to add a little piece at the bottom for her neck. To make Sally's mouth, I've rolled out some red fondant and some white fondant. And first of all, I'm going to cut out her lips. So to do that, I'm going to cut a semicircle into the fondant, and then I'm going to cut another semicircle about 1/2 centimetre below that. And then for the top lip, I'm just going to cut out a nice smooth M shape. After I've smoothed out the edges, I'm going to stick it onto the white piece of fondant, cut all the way around the mouth, and then position it on the cake. Sally's eyes are an oval shape, and I'm going to position them on a bit of an angle. 2 little balls of black fondant, which I'm going to flatten out, are going to form the pupils of her eyes, followed by a tiny little ball of white fondant for the reflection. For the cuts and the stitching on Sally's face, I'm going to roll out some snakes of all different lengths out of some black fondant. In the beginning of my tutorial, I showed you a black edible marker, and you could use this here to add all the details to Sally's face instead of rolling out all of the pieces of fondant. Personally, I prefer to roll out my fondant and stick it on. It gives a lot more impact to the cake, but this is always there as an option for you. Now that I've made these markings, I'm just going to go over them with my back pieces of fondant. I'll add some more stitching as well as outline her eyes, her lips, and her face and neck. I've spun my cake around now to work on Jack's side, and to cut his eyes out, I've cut a semicircle, and then for the top of the eye, I'm doing a kind of a wave, almost like an S shape. I also need 2 little oval nostrils, and I'm going to adhere all of these onto the cake. Once again, I've rolled out a whole lot of little pieces of black fondant, and I'm going to use these to add details to the top and the bottom of Jack's eyes, a nice big mouth, and the stitching that goes along his mouth. You can shape his mouth however you like to give whatever expression you're after. As I want my cake to look like an actual pumpkin, I need to create a stalk. So I've got 2 balls of fondant, one red and one white, and I'm just going to roll one end of the fondant to create the top of the stalk, and then I'm going to flatten out the bottom bit. This is going to cover the top of the pumpkin. Placing them back to back on the cake, I'm just going to glue them together with a little bit of water. The very last thing I need to do to finish off my cake is to add some hair for Sally, which is going to run all the way up her side of the stalk. And here they are, Jack Skellington and Sally both on the one cake. I did, of course, make a surprise inside cake. And just watch as I cut a slice of cake how all the candy falls out beautifully. So guys, I really do hope you enjoyed my Jack Skellington and Sally special double-sided 3D